A cold December night, a quiet home overlooking the deep evergreens of Point Defiance Park. Inside, 4 children were settling into a simple holiday evening, waiting for their parents to return from a social gathering. But at about 8:45 p.m., the calm inside that affluent Tacoma neighborhood was shattered by a sudden, heavy pounding on the back terrace doors. A masked man was demanding entry. What followed was swift, calculated, and chilling, the kind of crime people believed could never happen in a place like this. And the question that still lingers nearly 90 years later is the same one that haunted Tacoma at the time. How could a crime this deliberate disappear so completely into the Washington winter? Hello, friends. My name is Marcia, and this is Midwest Murders, where we explore the unsolved cases that still haunt America. This is the story of Charles Mattson, a boy taken from the safety of his own home on a bitterly cold night in 1936. Tacoma in the mid-1930s was a city trying to find its footing after years of economic strain. Washington had been hard hit by the Depression, and while the port and the mills kept Tacoma alive, daily life for many families was still a struggle. The mood of the era was cautious, practical, and shaped by the slow recovery. Point Defiance Park, where young Charles lived, stood in sharp contrast to the challenges the rest of the region was facing. Even then, it was one of Tacoma's most treasured areas. Living near Point Defiance meant safety, comfort, and a certain level of privilege, the kind of place where children rode bicycles freely and doors weren't always locked. It was one of the city's most desirable places to live. Well-kept homes, quiet streets, and a strong sense of community that gave the area an air of stability. That's what made this crime so shocking. Violence didn't belong here, and the idea that a masked intruder could walk into a well-lit terrace and force his way into a physician's home left the entire city shaken. Dr. William Whitlock Mattson, a respected surgeon, lived in the large brick mansion at 4605 North Verde Street with his wife Hazel and their 3 children. William Jr., or Billy as the family called him, age 16, Muriel, 14, and Charles, who was just 10. Muriel's friend, 15-year-old Virginia Chatsfield from Seattle, was visiting that night. The Mattson family enjoyed a comfortable life. Their beautiful brick home sat high on a bluff, with a steep path leading 300 feet down a terraced embankment toward the railroad tracks and the busy waterfront of Ruston Way. This context, the prominence of the family and the isolated location of the mansion, is key to understanding the sheer audacity of what unfolded that night. It was also a time when the fear of child kidnappings was still very real. The Lindbergh kidnapping had shaken the entire country just a few years earlier, and families everywhere were still uneasy with the idea that children could be taken for ransom. The Mattson case would take that fear and amplify it. The evening of December 27, 1936 began innocently enough. Charles, Billy, Muriel, and Virginia were in the living room, sharing popcorn and root beer and watching a holiday movie. It was calm, familiar, and safe. Then came the pounding on the French doors. Charles went to look and immediately ran back, telling the others a masked man was outside. The knocking grew louder, more forceful, and the intruder began muttering and demanding to be let in. When the children refused, he smashed the glass with the butt of his gun and reached in to unlock the door. Once inside, he terrorized the children with his revolver, immediately demanding money, searching 16-year-old Billy's pockets and finding nothing. The burglar muttered that a home such as this should be good for some money, but Billy truthfully told him they didn't keep cash in the house. The intruder's true, horrific goal was then revealed. He pointed at Charles and said, "I want you to come with me. You're your father's favorite, so you're worth more money." He grabbed the 70-pound boy, dropped a folded ransom note among the broken glass, and warned the remaining children that he would return and kill them if they called the police. Then he vanished with Charles into the dark, heading down that steep bluff toward the bay. During the frightening encounter and ensuing chaos, the kidnapper's mask slipped off, allowing the 3 remaining children to see his face clearly and later provide a detailed description to detectives. Billy immediately telephoned the police, who arrived within minutes, and then he called his parents. The FBI, empowered by new kidnapping laws, joined the case almost immediately. With the kidnapper's mask having slipped, investigators had a solid description. A swarthy, unshaven man in his late 30s, about 5'7", with dark hair, brown eyes, and a noticeable foreign accent. The steep escape path toward Ruston Avenue suggested a waiting car. Low tides that evening made an escape by boat unlikely. The ransom note recovered on the floor was already worn and dirty. It didn't mention Charles or the Mattson name, raising the troubling possibility that the boy was not his intended target. Here's where the investigation hit an immediate unsettling snag, hinting at the mystery of the true target. Because the note was dirty, old, and made no mention of Charles or the Mattson family, detectives theorized it was generic, prepared for any convenient kidnapping. But the most compelling theory suggested the kidnapper's original target was 6-year-old John Franklin, who lived nearby in the massive Hadaway Hall. A man matching the kidnapper's description had attempted to break into the Franklin house twice in late November, using a homemade ladder to try and reach the boy's upstairs bedroom. After the second attempt, which included the intruder firing a handgun at a guard while escaping, the Franklin family immediately left town for an impromptu vacation. Dr. Mattson was desperate. He tried every avenue to contact the kidnapper and pay the $28,000 ransom, but he was operating in a circus-like atmosphere. The Mattson residence was inundated with local and syndicated reporters, newsreel crews, photographers, and radio broadcasters. Reporters shadowed Dr. Mattson everywhere, making discreet negotiations impossible. In fact, leaks from inside sources and speculation were broadcast daily. Dr. Mattson publicly pleaded with both law enforcement and the news media to stop. He requested that the police stop searching and that the news media stop tracking him and reporting inside information so he could pay the ransom and secure his son's release. But, as we know, they didn't stop. Police followed every lead, questioning known criminals and searching wooded areas, abandoned cars, and makeshift shelters. Several items were recovered: a stolen car with blood inside, a knife, bloody clothing, and a shack that seemed to contain both men and boys' clothing. But none of it led to an arrest. The strongest lead remained the description given by the children. But even that wasn't enough. On Monday morning, January 11, 1937, about 2 weeks after Charles was taken, 19-year-old Gordon Morrow was hunting rabbits in a snow-covered field in Shonomas County, approximately 4.5 miles south of Everett. He stumbled across the horrific discovery: the naked, battered body of a young boy, frozen in the fresh snow. The body was identified at the scene as Charles Mattson by a close family friend and a relative. Charles had been dumped in a thicket of alder saplings, far from the Mattson home. Sheriff's deputies found tire tracks and footprints, confirming that the boy had been murdered elsewhere and his body left there either late Sunday night or early Monday morning. Gordon Morrow recalled his bulldog Nick barking excitedly around 9 p.m. Sunday, suggesting that might be when the body was left. A preliminary examination determined that Charles had likely been killed by blows to the head with a heavy blunt instrument. Bruises indicated he had been handled roughly, and marks on his wrists showed he had been tightly bound with rope. Investigators thought Charles had died no later than Thursday, possibly only a short time after his abduction. Further examination revealed that, in addition to the massive head injuries, Charles had been stabbed in the back with a long-bladed knife. Abrasions, grease marks, and dirt on his skin indicated that his frozen body had been hauled around in the trunk of an automobile. Blue clay on his face and hands suggested he had possibly been hidden on a riverbank or near mud flats before being dumped. The community mourned the loss deeply. The funeral for Charles was held on Thursday, January 14th. The brief 25-minute service was attended by about 200 friends and family. Among the scores of floral tributes was a large arrangement of roses and gardenias sent by FBI Director J. Edgar Hoover. Charles was interred in the crypt at the Tacoma Mausoleum. Perhaps the most significant long-term impact on the community came from the Tacoma Chamber of Commerce, who condemned the news media, accusing reporters of making gross mistakes that they believed had cost Charles his life. The story slipped from the front page in late January 1937 as leads began to dry up. However, the case was never closed and officially remains an open file at the FBI. The lingering questions here are multiple and deeply tragic. Was Charles Mattson the intended target, or was he simply the unfortunate victim of a plan originally aimed at John Franklin? Did the generic old pocket-worn ransom note indicate the kidnapper was an opportunist, or a meticulous planner who was merely reusing evidence? And perhaps the deepest mystery lies in the timing and the nature of the murder. Why was Charles killed so brutally? Blunt force trauma, a stab wound to the back, and why was his body hauled around in a car trunk and possibly hidden near mud flats? The kidnapper's immediate demand for ransom suggests money was the motive, but the failure to ever contact Dr. Mattson after the abduction, despite his public pleas and his willingness to pay, points toward a panic criminal or a plan gone horribly wrong. The fact that the children provided such a strong description, coupled with the detailed evidence found, the stolen blood-stained car, the bloody clothing, the knife, and the alleged hideout shack, and yet none of it led to a conviction, highlights a devastating failure in the coordination of the investigation. Looking back at the Mattson kidnapping, we're left with a sense of a community that tried desperately to help, yet may have unintentionally hindered the most critical part of the investigation. We're left with a family who did everything they could and still lost their youngest child. This case is a stark reminder of how high-profile crimes in the early 20th century, amplified by new technologies like radio and syndicated newspapers, could quickly descend into a chaotic media environment. We can only imagine the anguish of Dr. Mattson trying to secretly save his son while constantly being followed and having insider details broadcast daily. The Mattson family had to live with the knowledge that the man who took their 10-year-old son, the man the other children had stared directly at when his mask slipped, was never brought to justice. The mystery of his identity remains hidden in the cold, dark history of Tacoma. What do you think happened once the kidnapper ran down that steep bluff? Was he spooked by the media storm, or was the plan unraveling from the moment he stepped inside the house? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Until next time, stay curious, stay vigilant, and may the truth reveal itself in the shadows.